Good morning, everybody. Just to let you know that the webinar this morning is being recorded. So my name is Martin Penny, and I'm the head of unit for communication in the executive agency for the European Research Council. It's my pleasure to be your host this morning. As you may be aware, we're holding two information sessions on providing information on the ERC funding opportunities. The first is this morning, and there will be a second webinar next Wednesday, the 12th of March. The two information sessions are to provide practical guidance to researchers and those teams of people who support researchers, particularly in what we term the widening countries. These are countries where there are fewer applications so far that have been submitted to the ERC. And that because there are fewer applications, there are also fewer grants. This is something which the Scientific Council, which you know is our governing body, those who set the policy of the European Research Council, is particularly concerned about, that we ensure that we get information to researchers wherever they are, because excellence can be anywhere. And as you know, the European Research Council funds on the sole criterion of excellence. So we want to make sure that the information on our funding opportunities are available to everybody, irrespective of where you are. This webinar this morning will focus on the ERC individual grants. And by that, I mean the starting grant, the consolidated grant, and the advanced grants. We will not cover the synergy grants. If you have specific questions on synergy, perhaps at the end you can put them in the questions and answers, and we'll answer those offline because it's not the focus of the event today. These two sessions will also be followed by specific sessions, one towards the end of March for Moldova, one in July for researchers in Poland, and a further one where we're still determining the date for researchers in Bulgaria. What we hope today is give you information on the funding opportunities and also to give you information on proposal writing. That's, of course, the most critical step. You've got the great idea. It's putting it down in a way which is convincing and clear and makes the best case to the reviewers that are going to be reviewing your proposal. And that's why you'll receive guidance on how you prepare your applications during this session. So this morning, in addition to myself, those of you who are not here at the beginning, I'm Martin Penny, the head of communication at the European Research Council Executive Agency. I'm joined by four speakers who are really very much the experts in the areas they're speaking about. So Odetta Limay, who's a research program agent working in the scientific department in the physical sciences and engineering domain. Then there is Maxim Sitlonik, who's a project advisor, again in the scientific department, working in the life sciences area. We have Catherine Merola, who's a financial advisor, who will give you some tips and techniques on the things which are the kind of non-scientific part of your proposal, looking at the finances. And she's a financial advisor in our grant management department. And then finally, we have Carolina Avila, who's a research program agent working again in the scientific department, but working in the ethics assessment. But as always, when we do a webinar, you've heard from me. It's good to hear from you and to see who you are. So on screen, we're going to share a Slido poll, and we'll have a Slido code, and we'll have some questions for you. I could ask if you could all join Slido. You can do that on your computer or on your mobile, whatever you have to hand. Just scan the QR code or use the entry code which you see on your screen. And there will be some questions just so we can get a feeling of who's here and get to know a little bit more about you before we start. So the first one is a really simple question. Can you tell us which country you're joining from? So I see a lot of Germans. Good to see we're having people from Turkey, from the Czech Republic, from Poland, from Latvia, from Croatia, Estonia, I see, from the UK. Italy now becoming the biggest. Turkey is the biggest. This is great to see we're having participants from basically all over Europe. I see outside of Europe, we have Singapore, we have Israel. So also now I see Georgia coming, from Kenya as well, from Malaysia. And I think this is one of the things which is important to say, irrespective of your nationality and where you're currently working, there are opportunities for you. And it's something which we will go through. Our speakers will take you through that. So thank you. It's good to see where you're all coming from. Our next question is to understand your knowledge of the ERC application process. How familiar are you with it? Are you a little bit familiar, very familiar, or actually you're here because you don't really know at all anything about us and you want to learn? So actually, there's a lot of people who are somewhat familiar, but there's actually a lot of people, which is great to see, that are not familiar at all. And so this may be your first interactions with us, looking to see how you can get advice and guidance. And that's what this morning is all about. And I guess we have a lot of research support staff online who are the 14% very familiar. They're the people who are here in your institutions or your national contact points who are there to help you and guide you through the application process. Thank you. So the last question is only for those of you who are researchers and wanting to submit a proposal. Could you tell me, for those researchers, how many years of experience you have since completing your PhD? And you'll see why we ask for these levels of experience when Odetta gives her presentation. So some of you are postdocs. Some of you most of you are right at the start of their career, 2 to 7 years after their PhD. Some a little bit more advanced, and some very senior researchers, about 20% are senior researchers. But it looks as if the majority of you are looking for perhaps your first significant grant when you're applying for it. So thank you very much. It's always really useful to see this, to see where you're coming from and why you're here today. Let me take you through the program for the day. So in the first part, Odetta, who I've introduced already, will talk about the preparation of the proposal and how to fill in the application form. Don't worry, our application forms are very simple, and Odetta will take you through that. Then Maxime will give some insights into what happens once you submit your proposal, into the evaluation process. We'll take a short break so you can stretch your legs, get some coffee, and we'll go into the second part of the presentation, where Catherine will explain on how you need to prepare your budget and how you get support from your institution in doing so. And then finally, Carolina will give some guidance on the ethics requirements in the application stage. Because there's over 500 of us online, can I ask that we abide by some housekeeping rules? So first of all, if you can, unless you're a speaker, if you could keep your cameras and your microphones off, this will ensure we have some better stability in the WebEx session. If you could ask the questions only by Slido, and it'll be the same Slido code. This will be open shortly. We will open it after the presentation from Odetta. So after my presentation and the presentation from Odetta, we will open the questions and answers in Slido. If you're not familiar with questions and answers in Slido, what you can see is I would encourage you to review the questions which have already been submitted. And if it's similar to something which you've been asked or something which you'd value hearing the answer for, to give it a thumbs up in Slido, because the questions with the highest ratings will be the ones which we will answer first. So before submitting your question, just see if somebody else has had a similar question to you. And as we saw many of you at very similar stages, and many of you have similar knowledges of the application process. So it could be that people have very similar questions to you. Some information will be shared in the chat by my colleague Laura in terms of practical information. And then just finally, before I get onto my final comment, but in terms of the questions and answers, we will try to answer as many of those as possible as we can live. And so you can get questions in the questions and your questions answered in the questions and answer session at the end. If there are some questions which we don't have time to answer, we will answer those offline, and the answer to those will be available on the website for this webinar. So as you saw from the start, the session is recorded, and the recording of this webinar and all of the presentations will be available on our website in the next couple of days. So with what I would like to do then, first of all, is I would like to share I open my presentation on slide 3. I would like to share with you some basic information to give you a little overview of the ERC individual grants. You get a flavor of what we're going into more detail today. So first of all, as I said, my name is Martin Penny, and I'm the head of unit for communication. And one of the things which I think is important to know is the European Research Council is part of Horizon Europe. This is what's known as the Framework Programme for Research and Innovation, which is funded at European level. Overall, the ERC is about 17% of the budget for Horizon Europe. So it's a huge budget. We have about 16 billion euros over 7 years. So there's plenty of funding opportunities for you all there. But why would you even want to consider applying for an ERC grant? Many of you who are perhaps new and don't know us or are looking for the first grant application, why would you come to us? And I think the ERC gives you the freedom, the independence to be able to work on a research topic of your own choice. We're what's known as a bottom-up program. You choose the research question. It's not related to any political priorities or any other priorities. It's really your choice. You gain financial autonomy for 5 years. These are substantial grants, which will allow you to be able to spend time on your research and taking a breather, perhaps, from having to make many applications for other sources of funding. It's your grant. Whilst you be working with a host institution, so a university, a research company, a research organization, a company, whatever you want, in a European member state or an associated country to the framework program. We'll explain what that term means if you don't know, and there's a link in there in the slide if you don't know. But you get to negotiate the best terms for working, the best research positions for you, because these are prestigious grants, and you have the freedom to move your grant to a host institution at a different host institution in a member state or another associated country at any point in time. The grants also allow you to have staff. So the visibility of these grants will allow you to attract excellent team members and collaborators from anywhere in the world. And for those of you who have, for example, are moving back to Europe or have very need to have specialist equipment or large-scale facilities, there is an opportunity to have additional funding over and above the standard grant amounts. But Odetta and we'll explain that in a little bit more detail. So just to summarize, this slide basically says what I've said already. The grants are long-term grants. Everybody in this webinar can apply. Therefore, everybody, irrespective of nationality, from all over the world in any field of research. And the idea is our grants are really pushing back the frontiers of knowledge, which is why we refer to them as frontier research. We don't make the distinction between basic research or applied research, because sometimes that distinction can be a bit fuzzy. And so really it's about pushing the frontiers of knowledge as we know them. Odetta will give you more details about the individual grants, but to give you a flavor, the grants we're talking about are the starting grant, consolidated grants, and advanced grants. And you'll see the conditions here. Starting grants are for those for you 2 to 7 years after your PhD, with some allowance on those eligibility windows, which Odetta will take you through. Consolidated grants, 7 to 12 years after your PhD, and advanced grants are for everyone else. So you'll see now why we asked for those experience ranges in the opening question, so we can see which types of grants are perhaps going to be the most of interest to you. Now, this is probably a poor slide, because this, as you see, is looking for the grants from that last year's call. So those of you who are saying you're looking for a starting grant, you'll see the deadline was actually last year. The reason why I'm putting this slide up is these are for the calls for the financial year 2025. In a few months' time, we'll be opening our calls for the financial year 2026. And we haven't got the specific deadlines for those yet. So I don't want to mislead you with deadlines which may change. But for starting grant, it'll probably be towards the middle or beginning or middle of October. For consolidated grants, again, it's likely to be in early January. And for advanced grants, it'll be in August 2026. So this is, you can see the program for this year, but for most of you applying in this webinar, you're probably targeting the calls for next year. Those of you who are advanced grant age and experience levels, of course, the call will be open this year in May and closed in August. So just to clarify, the timing for next year's calls will be very similar to this year's. And finally, just one slide so you can see the amplitude of what we have funded so far. Since we started the European Research Council in 2007, we've funded over 14,000 top researchers. Actually, more research grants than that, because some researchers have gone on to win second and in some cases third grants. But in a few months' time, we'll be awarding the 15,000th grant that we have given since 2007. And those researchers work in almost 1,000 different research institutions across the EU and associated countries. And within those research teams, more than 100,000 researchers and other professionals have been employed within those research teams. Now, my last slide is just to say this: if this is your first experience of the ERC, there's plenty of support out there for you and plenty of advice and guidance services. You can get an awful lot of information from our website, and you'll be able to download these presentations and the recording of this webinar from our website. You have the national contact points. Some of them may be online. These are people appointed by governments in the member states and associated countries who are there to advise and guide you through the application session. And in our webinar next week, we'll take you through many of these support services, looking at the national contact points, and also looking at some specific schemes and support services for the widening countries, the countries which have submitted fewer applications so far, to assist you and in making your first application. All of the calls are published on a single portal, which is known as the EU Funding and Tenders portal. And so that's where you'll go to receive the formal documentation and actually to submit your application. And in addition to be able to ask us questions, the national contact points questions, you can also there's a formal research inquiry service where you can ask information and ask questions. But of course, today there'll be many opportunities for you to ask questions as well. So I will stop sharing my screen here. I hope that's given you a good overview of what we're going to be covering today. And with no further ado, I would like to give Odetta Nimai the floor to open and present her presentation on how to write a successful grant proposal. And just to remind you, the questions and answers will be opened in Slido immediately after Odetta's presentation. So Odetta, the floor is yours. Just pop it on, perfect, on full screen, and over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Martin, for the presentation, and welcome to everybody also from my side. As Martin said, I'm Odetta Nimai. I'm the coordinator of the P3 Condensed Matter panel. And with this presentation, I hope to give you some information and some tips on how to prepare a successful ERC proposal. Now, when you think of writing a proposal, I guess the first thing you think of is I'll sit in front of my laptop and I will write. And you know better than me, that is not that simple. It can be quite painful. But most importantly, writing a proposal comes at the end of a longer process, right? Of a long-term planning. This might sound obvious to some of you, but the feedback I got over 8 years from several people applying for an ERC is that this is a long-term effort where you need to plan beyond your next paper. You actually have to sit and think what you're going to do in the next 5 years. You are forced to go back to studying, which is maybe something you didn't do for several years because you were just there chasing one fund after the other. You are forced to sit there and think who you might need to collaborate with. And this is something that takes more than simply 1 month before the deadline. And most importantly, whatever you do to prepare for this grant or such big grants is something that will be a valuable resource for you to apply also for other funding agencies. And what I like to say is your chance to get your proposal reviewed by top scientists in the field that work for us, which otherwise you may not be able to reach because they are just too far and not within your network of collaboration. This is a bit in the, let's say, bigger picture, maybe philosophical point of view, but if we go to more nitty-gritty detail, what is it you need to do before starting? Now, you're going to say, this is obvious. Yes, it is obvious. Still, it needs to be said. Martin already mentioned that you can go on the funding, you should go on the funding and tender portal where you submit your grant. But one thing I would like to highlight is go on our website and read the documents. I know that many of you will think that there you will find PDFs of 300 pages full of acronyms, absolutely not accessible and not really helpful. This is not the case. Why? Because especially in the information for applicants, you will get this slide, so you can go directly to this link. It's a document of, I don't know, 20, 25 pages written in a human language by us to you, telling you exactly what we need you to do to apply for your grant. So if you don't get the information right at the very beginning, you risk wasting a lot of time. So it's really in your best interest to do this little investment at the very beginning. And also, like Martin said, contact the national contact point, contact the grant office at your institution. Probably they have a lot of years of experience so that you don't need to reinvent the wheel. This will save you a lot of time. Another thing you can do is talk to ERC grantees. In my experience, people who got an ERC grant are extremely open and willing to talk and to help people do the same. And maybe if you don't know who ERC grantees in your neighborhood are, all this data is freely available on our ERC dashboard. So you can find there all the information of where these ERC grants are, in which country, what the proposal is about, and which panel. So do the effort because the data is there. And as always, if you have any doubt, write to us because we keep an eye on these email addresses daily. So you'll get a prompt response from the people that are actually doing this business every day. So it's the safest way to answer your questions, I would say. Deciding whether to apply or not. Probably you've seen this slide in other webinars. The only thing I want to say here, where you see the budget available for ERC for every year, is that we are in 25 and the budget will keep increasing in the next years and will be the highest ever. So the take-home message is we will have more money than we have ever had for every year. So we'll be able to fund more proposals. So it's a good moment to apply for an ERC. And a bit of myth debunking, some people didn't realize this, but the success rate of ERC grants is around 15%, 1-5. Several people, many people thought that it was around even below 10. So this is a bit of a misconception that is out there. The success rate is competitive with other grants, and we're going to have more money and we'll be able to do better than that. If you are still thinking, should I apply or not? Another myth that is out there is like, most of you, around 50%, are in the starting eligibility window, meaning 2 to 7 years from your PhD. So people say, I will not apply in my 3rd year after the PhD. I will apply in my 7th year after the PhD, because then I will be more senior and I can win. I'm more likely to win. Actually, even though I understand the reasoning, our data-driven choices show us that this is not really supported by reality, because the success rate, this violet line, versus the year since PhD is somewhat flat here. So you have some noise due to, let's say, poor statistics for very senior people, but you don't see spikes close to the end of the eligibility window. So the message here is, if you are thinking about it, it's better that you apply early on. And even if you fail, maybe you have a second chance to apply within the same window, so for the same grant. And on your side, you will have the feedback that you got on your first application, and that will help you improve your next one. What do you have to do? The first thing that you have to do when you apply for an ERC grant is to choose the panel. Those of you who are familiar with us will know, but I saw that most of you don't know much about ERC. So ERC is organized along 3 domains: life sciences, in jargon called LS, physical sciences and engineering, P, and social sciences and humanities, SH. And each of these domains is organized in panels with the different acronyms here. And each panel is thematically defined. So for example, I coordinate the condensed matter physics panel P3. Each of these panels on the side of the agency, so where we work, has some officers like me who make, let's say, the evaluation machinery work together with our colleagues. And on the external side of scientists, have a committee of 13, 14, 15 people that are scientists active out there, who will be those assessing your proposal. So when you choose the panel, you are choosing the scientists somehow, the sort of audience that will read your proposal. And a very, I would say, simple advice I will give you, go on our website and check who served in these panels in the past. We publish this data once the evaluation is over. So this will give you a very good indication of which scientists have evaluated proposals in this panel, and you can see if this is a good match with your proposal. When you choose a panel, your proposal comes in this panel, and almost always it's evaluated there. We have the possibility of transferring your proposal to another panel if there's a clear mistake, or if it's considered that in the panel you chose, there is actually no expertise to assess it. So it would actually harm your proposal to stay there. But this is done only in exceptional cases. Some rumor has it that you should choose your panel strategically, because if you apply to certain panels, your success rate will be lower, and if you apply to others, it will be higher. This is absolutely not true, simply because the way the budget is distributed across panels is proportional to the submissions. More proposals in one panel, more budget allocated there, less in another panel, less budget. This is done on purpose to keep the success rate flat. Another rumor is that when you choose the panel, you can indicate some descriptors, so some keywords there. Choose as many as possible so it looks like your proposal is fancy and multidisciplinary. This is not really true, because the reviewers don't get these descriptors. They don't care. And this only risks confusing us when we need to think together with the chair of the panel how to organize the reviews and who should read what. So just choose what is relevant for your proposal. Another tip, this I like to say this often, and you'll hear me repeat it, the ERC website is your friend. A suggestion that we got, feedback that we got from many people, is that to choose your panel, the best thing you can do is go on our dashboard and look either for people that do more or less what you are doing, if they got a grant and where, in which panel, or if you have a panel in mind, go and check which proposals that panel has funded to see if they are close to your topic or not. This will be the best way somehow to find your way in the choice of the panel, which I said is quite important. Now, what is it you actually need to do? I mean, how does the proposal look like? As Martin said, you need to go to the funding and tender portal. I invite you to do it at an early stage to get familiar with it. There will be a part of the proposal that you need to fill online, like basic information. And you will be asked also to attach some PDF documents for administrative reasons. For example, the letter of support of your host institution, for which there is a template in our documents, a copy of your PhD certificate, and if you're requesting an extension of the eligibility window, let's say for maternity leave, paternity leave, or other reasons, a document proving this. None of this goes to the reviewers. So don't attach reference letter, don't attach any document that you think might help your case. This doesn't go to the reviewers. What goes to the reviewers is only this section of the part A, which is the budget and resources that Catherine will cover in one of the next presentations. And most importantly, the part B1 and part B2. These are submitted as PDFs, and they constitute basically your proposal. Part B1 is composed of an abstract and a small box where you can indicate whether your proposal actually touches on 2 panels. So you can choose an additional panel to explain it's highly multidisciplinary, and you can explain why. The extended synopsis is up to 5 pages, references not included, where you give the main feeling of your proposal and some indications on what is your idea on how to do it. And then up to 4 pages of CV and track record. Part B, again as a PDF, contains scientific proposal, means details of the methodology, and then funding ID table, not to assess how cool you are in raising money, but to see if there's any overlap with ongoing applications or grants that you have. The rest of my presentation will be focused on these 2 documents and how to help you and guide you prepare them. Part B1. So as Maxime will explain, this part B1 PDF is what is assessed by the reviewers in step 1. And what should you ask yourself when drafting this document? The main thing I would say is that what you propose needs to be novel. It needs to go beyond the state of the art. If you have been doing something for quite some time and you plan on adding a new material, trying a new instrument, being incremental, this is a no-go. So ERC is about suggesting something novel, and ERC is about suggesting something ambitious. So you have to think big. You have to start to build up your proposal and aim at something that can be actually exciting, that maybe in national funding or in the private sector, people will be a bit scared of supporting because they have no guarantee of success. And if that's the case, ERC is the right place to go. But it shouldn't be completely crazy, right? So you have to be ambitious, but you should have at least some elements to show that you have a starting hypothesis and you can support your idea on why you're aiming at that goal. Another question you should ask yourself, is it timely? I mean, if it's so amazing, why this was not done before? Maybe a new technology is available that allows for that. Maybe you have a new idea that was never tried in the past. What is the difference? What is important here? What's the risk? If you don't have any risk, maybe you are not ambitious enough in this proposal. So having risk is not bad, but show it. Don't hide it under the carpet. Show that you have thought of it and explain what your mitigation measures are. Another question is somehow referred to as why me, but in reality it's like, why should it be you doing this? If this has been a long-standing problem and nobody has managed to solve it right now, why should you be able to do that? Are other people doing that? And why you should succeed and they shouldn't? Know that you have done your work and studied literature appropriately. And if you cannot cover all the expertise needed in the proposal, so you need some collaborations, that's perfectly fine. Highlight them, show that you have thought of that, but just be careful that you are not lost in your network of collaborations. If this grant is the result of you doing a tiny bit and somebody else doing a tiny bit and so on and so forth, so you are one of many, then you are not really the leader of the proposal. And this is something you should avoid. When, for those of you who might have already submitted an ERC grant, but given the answers you gave at the very beginning, I imagine this might be a handful. But it's still worth highlighting. There are some novelties with respect to the past. Novelties regarding the research project is you might be familiar with the expression high risk, high gain. ERC is about high risk, high gain. Now, this expression has been removed, not because the philosophy is different. ERC still wants the same, but this expression high risk, high gain was felt a bit controversial in all different fields. Some people automatically thought high risk was bad. So nothing changes in terms of the nature of the proposal. It still needs to be groundbreaking and ambitious. Also, another thing that has been removed is requests for novel methodologies, simply because it's felt that you can do groundbreaking frontier science with old tools, and that's perfectly fine. A suggestion that I would give you is look at the questions that the evaluators have to answer. You find this in the guide for applicants. Make it easy for them to answer this. Don't hide the answers in the text in a convoluted way. Imagine if you were a reviewer and you need to answer this, it would help a lot if you could easily identify these elements in the proposal. In part B1, besides the research project, about which we just talked now, there's also, as you remember, the part on CV and track record. Since 2024, there have been some changes here. The Scientific Council of the ERC has decided to go more towards a narrative CV to give you the chance to best explain what your contribution has been. And the CV is organized in 3 sections, as you'll see. One on personal details, current position, qualification, and previous appointments. Research achievement and peer recognition. This, I would say, is the most important part. Here, you should highlight up to 10 research achievements, where by research achievements, we don't mean any more publications. They can be publications, but not only, but can be anything that you consider demonstrates your maturity in the field. Maybe you developed a software that has been used by many people and has changed a lot how things are done in your field. Maybe you've started a series of conferences that has picked up and brought people together and introduced some novelties in your field of expertise. Whatever you think might prove scientific maturity, you can put it here. And then a third section where you can provide any explanation on career breaks, diverse career paths, life events. The idea is that here it's your chance to talk to the reviewers and to explain why your CV looks as it is. So to give them the right context to properly assess your CV. Some tips or suggestions. There is a template for the CV. It's not mandatory, but we recommend you to use it because it helps. The reviewers have a streamlined proposal. Explain what has been your contribution to the publications and how they have impacted the field. ERC panels are briefed, and that they should really be careful not to put too much emphasis on bibliometrics. H-index, impact factor of the journals. We know these are really poor metrics to assess the quality of a scientist. So what is important is that you explain in your own word what your unique contribution was to that specific achievement. If there are gaps in your CV, don't pretend they are not there, because it might look sketchy. So point out that maybe COVID impacted you because your lab was closed for a long time, so you couldn't do measurements. Or maybe you were on a maternity leave. Or maybe there was a long-term illness if you feel like sharing that. Or maybe you went to the industry for some time and there you don't publish papers. Whatever is important, say it and don't hide it. The idea is that the reviewer should come out saying, yes, I can trust this person over 5 years to handle up to 2.5 million. They wouldn't be lost, they wouldn't need supervision. I think they can manage. Another very important thing is that since 2024, the Council has explicitly asked reviewers to put more emphasis on the project than the PI. And one of the reasons for doing so was to level the playing field for PIs, regardless of where you're coming from. If you come from an outstanding, very rich university in very well-established entities and countries, or if you come from a widening country, for example. This doesn't matter. If you have a great idea and you can show that you have worked enough to be able to implement it, that is fine. Rumor to debunk. Rumor. One is you need to have publications in Nature and Science or high impact factor journals to succeed. I could simply say that's not true. You wouldn't believe me. So I did some exercise, which is not statistical analysis, it's purely anecdotal, but I retrieved the H indices of the people who got the starting 24 grant in P3. And basically their H index went from 7 to 19. Again, this is anecdotal, but if I told you, with the H index of 5, 6, 7, 9, you can get an ERC grant, maybe you wouldn't have believed me. So I still think it's a nice thing to show. Some advice on writing part B1. Avoid jargon, excessive highlighting. Sentences like, my proposal, it's outstanding and will bring frontier of science beyond the state of the art with groundbreaking research, means nothing. It's empty. It's smoke and will make them upset. Do not oversell it. They are scientists, so don't put the smoke, put the meat, because if you do otherwise, they will notice. Very obvious advice, but make sure there are no typos. The legends are correct. If you're using LaTeX, that the references work and so on. If you don't put effort in writing your proposal, it will come through as sloppy and they will not be happy. Make sure it's accessible to generalists. What does it mean? That not everybody in the panel will be spot on the topic of your proposal. So my advice and the advice of many people who have submitted is prepare the proposal well in advance and have every person you know in every field basically read it, so that you have a feedback that is not too cryptic and difficult to access. Put all the literature search you have done and the studies, put the reference list. It doesn't count towards the number of pages. Show that you did your homework. If now we go to part B2, which is an additional document that is read in the second step of the evaluation, this is up to 14 pages. And the idea is that here is for the details. You don't simply copy paste B1 into B2, because I have access also to B1, but use this to give all the details of the methodology you plan to use. Which materials, why, which characterization you are going to make, what is your plan in terms of risks. Imagine you have 3 work packages. and the second builds on the first one, and the third builds on the previous one. If the first one fails, what are you going to do? Try to show that you thought of this and you have measures in mind. You are expected to give some sort of timeline, like I expect to do this in the first year. One PhD and one postdoc student will be working there, and then there will be some overlap to have transfer of knowledge, and then they will go to the second work package and so on. Use the full available space. If the panel feels that you didn't explain something properly and you still had 4 pages left, they will be like, why didn't they do that? They even had space to do so. So this is really not easy to justify. Last but not least, explain your budget properly. Catherine will talk about this more in detail later, but from the point of the evaluators, what is it with the budget? The budget is not assessed in step 1, it's assessed in step 2. And most importantly, maybe many of you don't know, it's assessed only after the panel has already decided who gets the funding. So the budget plays no role, so how much money you asked plays no role in whether you get the funding or not. They first decide who's awarded, and then they check the budget. And how do they check the budget? They don't micromanage. They don't say, here you asked for 15,000 for open access, you should have asked for 10. That's not how it's done. It's done based on the resources you asked for. If you ask for 5 PhD students and the work you have presented is kind of limited and looks like it could be done with 3, the panel will wonder whether you need the additional 2 PhD students, and if it's not convinced by your answer, might cut it. This is not a negotiation, so it's not that in the interview they can be like, look, we give you 500,000 less. Do you accept? And I said, yeah, okay, I can do with that. This is a take it or leave it. So you just get the grant with that amount of money. And there are quite some rumors out there. Some people say I'm sorry, because yes. So some people say just ask for a large sum, because if you ask for a small sum, it looks like your proposal is not ambitious enough. But as I said, the sum will be visible at the end. So whatever scientific assessment they make, it doesn't play, the budget doesn't play any role. Another rumor out there is that always ask for the maximum, because they will cut anyway. And as I said, this is not true. They are briefed carefully, and we supervise their work to make sure that they cut only exceptionally if a resource is not justified. You are asking for the 3rd dilution fridge. You already have 2, and you didn't explain why you need the 3rd one. This is the sort of conversations that we have. Assume you did everything you could, and still this doesn't go through. What are the typical reasons for rejections based on my experience and what we observed? On the research project, it can be the scope. So maybe you were too narrow. You didn't dare enough. You were not ambitious enough. Or maybe the other one, you were too broad. Your proposal suggests that there is going to solve all the problems in the world, and this is absolutely not convincing. Incremental, I spoke about this at the very beginning. It was not novel enough, and this is a real buzzkill. Collaborative project, looks like you are one of many PIs. It's not clear that you are the leader. Or maybe there are not enough details in part B2 to assess that you can actually do it. We have concerns on whether this is feasible or not. And there are risks for which you didn't provide some reasonable reassurance. On the principal investigator, usually is that you have insufficient track record, so they are not convinced that you will be able to carry out the project that you promised. Maybe you have no expertise in DNA origami and you promise to work a lot with that. Or for example, you have always worked under the supervision of very well-known people. It's not clear you could do this as an independent researcher. If you're rejected, keep trying. This is not just to, let's say, to convince you to do that, but we know for sure that reapplications have a higher success rate. And as I said before, this is your chance to get feedback from top scientists out there, and you can use this to write your next application. And with this, I'm at the end of my presentation, and I hope to see you at your ERC interview.
Thank you very much, Odetta, for that very clear presentation. Just a couple of comments from my side before I give the floor to Maxime for the next presentation. First of all, the questions and answers in Slido will now be open. And so if you can go to the Slido poll using the same code as we had before, it's now shown on the screen. So the questions and answers will be opened. We'll have a first round of questions and answers after Maxime's presentation. So any questions you may have from Odetta, and I see the applause coming through to Odetta. This is always great to see. You'll be able to ask questions to Odetta and also to Maxime following Maxime's presentation. Secondly, you'll probably have seen in the chat, if you haven't seen it already, my colleague Laura has given you information on the national contact points, on the panel members, on how the link for the funding and tenders portal, and also the dashboard, which Odetta mentioned. And finally, if Odetta seemed familiar to you, she was one of the presenters of what we call the ERC classes, a series of guidance videos available on our YouTube channel. And we will share the link for that as well in our chat very shortly. But with no further ado, Odetta has given you an overview of how you prepare your proposal. Maxime will now take you through what happens once we've received your proposal. So Maxime, the floor is yours to take you through the take us through the ERC evaluation process.
Maxime, can you see the slides? Yeah. Good. So good morning. My name is Maxim Chitlonak, and I'm working as scientific officer in life science domain at the ERCEA. My background is PhD in biophysics, and in this presentation, I will tell you in more detail about the ERC evaluation process of the individual grants. So the evaluation starts after the submission deadline. Once proposals arrived in the system, the first thing we do as a panel, we start screening for the potential conflict of interest. And this is done at two levels. First, this is the self-declaration by the panel members. So if they find out that they collaborated with one or another applicants, they can declare conflict of interest. The second one is on our side using ERC in-house developed tools. And we take into account the excluded reviewers as well, which the applicants have put down on their application. Then we have a meeting with the panel chair, and in this meeting we finalize the proposal assignment based on the keywords provided by the applicants and the abstract provided by the applicants. We also distribute the workload between the panel members so that each of them gets an equal number of proposals. In rare cases, if the proposal ended up by mistake in the wrong panel, or no expertise is available in that panel, we agree on the proposal transfer between the panels, but the agreement should come from both panel chairs. Then the evaluation is launched, and at the same time, we organize a briefing with panel members where we remind them about the evaluation criteria and the ERC rules, and we explain the whole evaluation process to them. As mentioned before, ERC is a single submission but two-step evaluation process. The applicants submit Part B1 and Part B2 at the same time. However, in Step 1, the panel members evaluate only Part B1 of the proposal. This includes the extended synopsis and the CV of the PI. Panel members do not have access to the Part B2 at this stage. And that is why it is also very important to have enough information in Part B1 to assess if the proposal is feasible in the implementation. So the most important methodological details should be already mentioned in the Part B1. And we often see that any significant information is omitted in Part B1, and then it's very difficult for the panel to assess if the proposal is feasible or not. In this evaluation step, the panel focuses on the groundbreaking nature, ambition, and the feasibility of the proposal. And as mentioned before, now it is less relevant, but still an important evaluation criteria is the principal investigator. Here, the panel looks at the intellectual capacity and creativity of the PI. The publication, it's all been mentioned before, the publications are not the only assessment criteria for the panel. Other achievements play also an important role. From my experience, the panel focuses much more on the proposal in the recent evaluations than on the CV of the applicant. They look more in detail at the applicant if they have a doubt whether the PI is really able to execute the ambitious project proposed. So, what happens before the panel meeting? So before the first panel meeting in Brussels, panel members receive all individual reviews, typically 4 per proposal, sometimes 5 or 6, depending if the proposal is very interdisciplinary or not. The panel members don't receive the reviews with the proposals. They have a conflict of interest. Panel members find out for which proposals they will be lead reviewers, and they have to be prepared to present the project in the panel meeting to the panel. They will also be responsible to write panel comments at the end of the meeting. On the first day of the panel meeting, the panel members are briefed one more time by us, the panel team, the scientific officers and the panel coordinator, and also by the ERC president. All proposals are discussed and then scored and ranked. And at the end of the panel meeting, the panel members write panel comments as feedback to the applicants and assign remote referees to the proposals that made it to step 2 or the interviews. So what is the outcome of the step 1 evaluation? Proposals are ranked, so either A, invited, and it can be up to maximum 44 proposals. And the reason behind is that we are not able to have more than 44 interviews per week. Then they A, uninvited. These are the proposals with the possibility to reapply next year, but only if the limit of 44 is reached. And it doesn't concern all the panels, only a few panels. And the B or C is also ranked. And these proposals, or the applicants actually, they have 1 or 2 years of waiting time before the resubmission, respectively. And the applicants who did not make it to the interviews, they receive the feedback from the panel members. And this includes the individual reviews and the panel comments. And this might help them later when they will submit the proposal to improve their proposal. So immediately after step 2, we launched the step 2 evaluation, and the panel members, including the remote referees, evaluate the full scientific proposal that includes the part B1 and the part B2 and the proposal budget information. In addition to the evaluation criteria mentioned before for the step 1, all reviewers need to look in more detail into the research methodology proposed, and this is in part B2. And in this additional evaluation criteria is written here. And the question is it appropriate to achieve the goals of the project? And the reviewers should also assess the proposed timescale, resources, and the PI commitment. During the step 2 evaluation phase, the panel team are busy with the remote referees recruitment suggested by the panel members. We usually try to have 4 remote referees per proposal, but sometimes it can be difficult or too easy. So we might end up in the range between 2 and 7 remote referees per proposal. And if the suggested remote referees decline, and we don't have enough remote referees, we contact the panel members to suggest more potential expert reviewers for the proposal. And at the same time, we also perform the eligibility check for the applicants who made it to step 2. As in step 1, the panel members receive all reviews from the panel members and from their remote referees before the meeting. In this case, they are able to prepare for the interviews. The lead reviewers, they have to do a bit more work, and they also have to take into consideration questions raised by the remote referees for the interview. During the meeting, the interviews are conducted according to the panel's specific guidelines. It can be usually a presentation and question and answer session. Some panels might not even request a presentation and move directly to questions, but other panels might want to have a lengthy presentation. So please follow the guidelines provided to you by the panel when you are invited for the interviews. So after the interviews, the proposals are ranked. Panel members or the lead reviewers write the panel comments. And we also organize a session to collect feedback from the panel members in order to provide suggestions for the scientific council how we would like to improve the process. So what happens if you've been invited for the interview? Make sure you have a good presentation focusing on your research project. Don't try to make a business presentation. You're talking to passionate scientists and not investors. Get the panel interested and intrigued by your ideas. Don't try to oversell or over-explain your CV. They have all the details in the written form. They already looked at it. The time between the submission and the interview can be long, so it may be that you have collected some additional data to support your proposal or initial idea. So don't hesitate to provide this additional preliminary data if you have it. And it's very important to anticipate the questions. You really need to know the methods you're going to use, and you really also need to know your competitors and collaborators. It is very important to follow the instructions provided by the panel and to practice several times. As mentioned before, panels might have specific requirements, and if they ask for a presentation of 8 minutes, make sure you keep to 8 minutes. Otherwise, the panel chair can interrupt you to make sure that there is enough time for questions. The schedule is tight and each interview has specific allocated time, so please take it into account. After the proposals are ranked as A's and B's, all A's are recommended for funding, but not all A's are funded. The budget limit will decide which proposals are funded and which proposals are ultimately put on the reserve list. Some proposals from the reserve list might end up being funding later on. All applicants from step 2 receive feedback, and the whole evaluation procedure is run in parallel in all 3 domains and in 28 panels. And each panel can have between 13 and 18 panel members, depending on the number of proposals in the panel. So, I wanted to finish this presentation with the last slide about the myths and mistakes we usually, which are going around among the applicants. And one of the myths is, for example, that the English speakers have a clear advantage. And I want to say that it's not true, because we often see perfectly prepared and presented slides by native speakers, but they are not able to answer the questions properly. Similarly, often we see applicants with not very good English, nervous during the interview, but very passionate about the research, with great ideas, and are able to address all concerns raised by the reviewers, and they have much higher chances to get funded. Then projects with acronyms starting by A have a better chance to get funded. It's also not true. The discussion order in the panel, whether it is by acronym, initial ranking, submission ID, or other, does not affect the funding success. Each proposals are discussed in equal manner. Then the interviews scheduled for late afternoon are less successful because the panel is already tired, for example. Well, that is also not true. The panel puts a lot of effort to stay focused and motivated through the whole process, and they dedicate equally enough time for each proposal. And we also see some common mistakes. For example, when the applicant is unsure about the idea, the applicant starts to appear not convincing when answering the questions. The panel doubts whether the proposal was written by a postdoc or head of department instead of the applicant. It is very obvious when it concerns the methodology to be used in the project, when the applicant doesn't really know the nitty-gritty details of the methodology to be applied. And the panel usually asks those details. Or when the PI provides long answers without addressing the question properly and wastes time. Or when the panel identifies a clear omission of previous development in the field, and the applicant tries to hide it either in the proposal or during the interview. The panel will find it out, and then it's going to be used against you. So please mention everything. So with this, I would like to end my presentation and we can move to the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maxime. And actually, just to remind you, the questions are open, and I see some of the questions which have been asked. Maxime has answered already in some in his presentation, but we will take you through all of the questions. We have now probably about 20 minutes for a first round of questions and answers. We'll try and get through as many as we can. There'll be a second question and answer coming later. If you haven't asked a question yet so far, you can do so in Slido. And we'll take the questions in the order of the biggest number of thumbs up that people have given. So if I start immediately with the questions, if I can ask maybe all of the speakers to put their cameras on, because some of the questions will also be for perhaps the later speakers as well. Start with the question which go to either Odetta or to Maxime. And Rosario, there's unfortunately a little box which is right in front of the question. So you just need to minimize some things on your screen. But let me read it to you now. Many of the younger scientists are now very interdisciplinary and may not easily fit into any of the panels. For example, engineering education during social science research. How to deal with this? So maybe Odetta, come to you first of all. Maxime, do you have anything else to add?
This is a tricky question because I fully understand. We know that multidisciplinary proposals suffer of the fact that not all fields they touch upon feel ownership for that. So it is tricky. If I am pragmatic, what I would do is, as I said, go to the dashboard and see, because I imagine you might not be the only person working in this field, right? So to me, and what I've seen people do, the most obvious thing would be who are the other competitors that you have and where did they apply? Another consideration you can do is that you choose the panel as a first panel, the one that you think might appreciate most the proposal. So is it about where the methods that you use, or is it about where this is going to have an impact? Which of the two audiences you think might appreciate this best? So you have to identify, even if it's multidisciplinary, where the weight is the most. And I would say the dashboard helps, but this is a well-known problem, so it's not an easy question.
Maxime, anything else to add?
Yes, you're welcome to add additional keywords or additional panel on your proposal if it's really truly interdisciplinary. And the panel tries to do their best to get additional cross-panel reviews from other panels to cover the proposal so that it receives an equal treatment. So we do our best. And when it comes to step 2, the panel collects the feedback from remote referees from different disciplines. So don't worry about it. Your proposal is going to be treated equally like all the other proposals, which suit more maybe in that panel.
Thanks very much, Maxime. And from my side, I'd just like to highlight one of the things which Odetta said. I think the most important thing is, what's the most exciting part of your project? What's the most novel bit? What's going to make the panel members go, gosh, this is amazing. I want to see more of this in B2, and I think this should be funded. That's perhaps to look to see where that area of research should be covered by one of our panels, and perhaps that should be your primary panel. And as Maxime says, you can add different keywords, different panels as a secondary panel. I hope that answers. The second question that we have on screen is very similar in terms of, oh, and actually now it's just changed. Okay, we'll come back to that one later, but this is the problem of Slido, things change in real time. This is a simple question. Maybe Catherine, you also want to come in here. I was wondering what would happen if I decide to change my host institution later on. So maybe Maxime, I come to you first of all.
Yes, it's no problem. ERC grants are transferable. So if you decide to change the host institute, you can introduce an amendment and it can be done with no issues. As long as it's in the European research area.
Indeed, as long as they're from a member state or an associated country. Catherine, from the financial side, from the grant management side, maybe you can come in too.
Yeah, so actually we have procedures in place to deal with those situations, either at granting, so just after the proposal has been selected, or even once we sign the grant agreement, and as Maxime said, then you will introduce an amendment to change the host institution. So there is no issue as long as the new host institution is established in a member state or an associated country, of course.
Thanks very much, Katrina. As she says, many starting grantees actually change their host institution before they start the grant. They apply with one host institution and actually carry out the grant with another. It's what I said at the beginning about this ability to negotiate the best conditions, both from a scientific point of view, maybe also from a career stability point of view as well. I see we have 73 questions. Don't worry, we'll get through as many as we can. And those which we can't answer, we will answer in writing. But a question which is actually for me, the next one, the ERC classes on YouTube are very helpful. Do you plan to update these videos, for example, to reflect the changes implemented in 2024? Easy answer is yes. So we'll be starting filming shortly. So there'll be a new set of classes on the application and evaluation process, which will be available when about the time when the 2026 work program is announced. So the calls, which many of you are going to be applying for, when they come out, you get the details of them in the summer. The new videos will be ready shortly after that as well. We'll also extend those videos to look at some aspects of grant management for those of you who are successful in getting a grant and want to have some information on how best to manage it. So before I mentioned this, this question, sorry, there's just a couple of text boxes, Rosario, which just need minimizing. But this is a similar question but to before the one which we had. In what's the best strategy in proposing a multidisciplinary project? How to convince that you can lead a project with different pieces that require different expertise, but you have the ability to coordinate and lead this project. So we're just having a problem with the screen, but hopefully you heard me the question. This is a question about the strategy for proposing a multidisciplinary project. So Odetta, maybe I come to you first on that.
Yes, I think this is a bit along the lines of what we answered as the first question. I would say that you as a leader should have the unifying element of the proposal. So you should have somehow the grasp on the glue that is bringing all these small pieces together. As I said, if you are the person proposing a new approach to be applied somewhere, but for example, you are not able to synthesize the materials by yourself, it's fine. This is a small part in a bigger view. If your proposal is entirely focused on synthesis of materials and you don't have that expertise, then we have a problem. So the idea to keep you in the driving seat of the main core of the proposal and to get expertise on auxiliary aspects when needed. So I would say that your expertise and your background would need to be linked to the core of the proposal, because regardless of how multidisciplinary it is, you can identify a core in that.
Maxime, anything else to add?
I think if you would like to convince the panel even more, and if you can show that you have done such a project, interdisciplinary project at a much smaller scale, that you are able to mobilize the researchers to work with you together, can be an advantage. So it might help you.
Thanks very much. The next question reflects the fact that, as we saw at the beginning, many of you are relatively young in your career, a few years after the PhD. And I think this is a very genuine question, which a lot of people have this question. If I have a novel idea, but I don't have sufficient experience in it yet, does the proposal have a chance of success? Maxime, I come to you first.
It depends on the idea and also depends on your CV. If you can prove that you can execute the project based on your expertise, even if you don't have a lot of experience, then I think you should still apply. However, if you find that your expertise is not good enough to cover the main aspects of the project and you still need 1 or 2 more years to develop your expertise, I think it's better to wait to gain the expertise, maybe to publish more and to develop your network. This will improve the chance of success.
Odetta.
As I said, the idea comes first. The council said that the idea comes first now. So we are putting more weight on that. But whether you are able to run the project is also an element for assessment. And if you are proposing to use equipment, some strategy and so on, that you have never ever touched, then there are genuine concerns of how you'll be able to run it. So this said, the idea comes first, so you shouldn't stop yourself, and depends what you define sufficient experience. You didn't publish Science and Nature yet, we don't care, go for it. But if you have never done anything related to the experimental stuff you propose, then it might be a bit more problematic indeed.
And this actually brings us on perhaps well to the next question, in terms of if you need to bring collaborators into the project. Where can they be from? From any country or only from the EU? So maybe I go to Odetta first on this one.
Collaborators can be from anywhere.
Thanks.
So, and they can get budget even if they are outside of EU. So there's no limitation there.
There is just one restriction, which, as we know, because of current sanctions regulation, public and private organizations based in the Russian Federation are not eligible. and also those based in Belarus are not eligible. But other than that, from any country from the world, as Odeta says. So Maxime, I come to you with the next question, which is the one we get asked a lot. Is it true that the ERC is for basic research only and not for applied research?
Well, we have POC grants, which is more linked to the applied research, but it's not also just basic research. You can have a bit of applied research in your application. Like in life science domain, you have LS7 panel where there's a bit more applied research, but the main idea of ERC is the basic research.
Well, actually, Maxime, I think that's coming from a life sciences perspective, perhaps, where it's a little different. I'm a
Yes.
physical scientist myself, and so what is clear, the ERC does not make a distinction between basic and applied research. Any type of research you can apply. So that's why we use the term frontier research. It doesn't matter where you are on the TRL spectrum, on the technology readiness level. If you're pushing back the frontiers of knowledge, you can apply. So it's the novelty of the idea. It doesn't matter how basic or applied it is. And that's why you'll see in our documentation, we don't use those terms. So it's much more in terms of this idea of, is it really bringing something new? Doesn't matter if it's much nearer to application or not. And so particularly in some areas of ones I'm familiar with in terms of computer science and engineering, they can be actually very applied, but they don't have to be. That's why we don't use the term basic and applied. It's really for you to come up with an idea that's going to push back the frontiers of knowledge. Odeta, can I come to you with the next question, which is a difficult one to answer. Is there a minimum H-index expectation for the advanced grant? I think the answer
I would have said
no,
this is an easy one. I would have said easy
no.
because the answer is simply no.
Yeah.
There's no expectation whatsoever in terms of H-index. What is expected is that you have done some contribution over your career in the field. Beforehand, we had the limit on the last 10 years. So you should show that you have contributed in the last 10 years. This limitation has been lifted. So it's not measured with the H-index, but you have to have done something in your field.
No, that's clear. Thank you very much. This one, I'm not sure if we have the statistics to hand, but maybe Odeta, Maxime, if you can give an indication, it would be good. And we can maybe answer this one offline with real statistics. We'll mark this one as to be answered still. Do you have brief data on how much the success rate improves for reapplicants? Is it just a small increase or does it really increase significantly?
So my recollection is that it's not a small increase. It does increase significantly. I have a number on top of my head, but I'm not going to share it because I'm checking with our data analysis team right now. And as soon as I have it, I'll write it in the chat.
Thanks very much, Odeta. And this one we will mark as to be answered in writing afterwards so that we give you the real statistics. It's always awful giving statistics live when we want to be sure which we have. Katrine, I think the next question is more for you in terms of how can ERC grant be transferred to another university? Another country has different costs for materials and personnel, and do these costs then get covered?
Yes, so of course, when there is a change of host, especially if the change of host is to go to another institution in another country, the resource section and the budget might be adapted, of course, to the need and to the, let's say, the necessity in that new host institution. So in principle, the resources would remain more or less the same, because these are the resources that you need to implement the project, but you will adapt the cost of those resources.
Thank you very much. That's very clear. Then we come back to a question which is always the question. As soon as we show the slides on panels, it always looks a little bit confusing and we need to explain a little bit more. And I think this is a question which reflects that. Can you explain better how the researcher should choose the ERC panel? Is it okay to add secondary panels if the research touches aspects related to different fields? And does it have an impact on the evaluation? Maxime, perhaps you can start with that one.
Yes, in Odeta's presentation, you've seen a slide with the keywords for each panel. You should look in your proposal and at the keywords and see where your proposal fits the best. You can also go to the ERC website and look in the ERC dashboard to see where similar proposals have been funded before and which panels suits best to you. And it's also okay to put the secondary panel on your application, because this would help in the evaluation process by the panel team to allocate cross-panel reviewers from another panel. So this would be the impact on the evaluation. We try to make the evaluation as fair as possible and as best as possible.
Odeta, anything to add?
Maybe I would emphasize once again what you were saying, Martin, because for example, very simple example, in my panel, we have biophysics. And you might say, why is it in the condensed matter panel? That should be in life sciences. But there is a whole cohort of physicists doing, for example, DNA origami, cell biology, and so on. So when you choose the panel, think who might be excited to hear that, because maybe the same proposal would be killed in a certain community that doesn't see the advantage there, while would be quite successful in another community. So think who you want your audience to be. And what Maxime was saying, in terms of evaluation, we ask this cross-panel review that if you don't know what it means that we ask one reviewer from another panel, the secondary panel you indicated, to write an assessment. And when we meet and the panel, the first panel meets to decide, they read this assessment. The person is not participating to the meeting, but they read this assessment so they make a more informed decision, taking into account both points of view. Thanks
very much. I'm going to take the next two questions together. First one from Anna Mora. Thanks for putting your name. It's always nice to see who's asking the question. And the second question relating to independence. Is it necessary to be a group leader to get a starting grant, or can you be a senior postdoc? And do you already have to be appointed at the host institution before application? Odetta, I come to you.
Yes. Potential for independence is very important. You don't need to have a group. You don't need to have already a team or established students and so on to work with. So the potential for application, especially for starting grants, it would be hypocrite of us to ask you to be independent when you're just starting your career 2 years after PhD, for example. So that is the message. And in terms of host institution, you don't need to be already appointed, but when you do the application with this letter of the host institution that you need to submit, for which we have a template, there the host institution commits to employ you should you win the grant. So you don't need to be already employed, but if you win the grant, then you will need to be employed by that host institution or another one. If maybe you get the grant and another host institution is excited that you got it, wants to get the money out of it and offers you maybe a better deal, you can move it even before starting, but you don't need to have it already established as a contract or an appointment.
Thank you. And what I can just add to that is it's often the case for starting grantees that you're not appointed. But you can be sure if you get an ERC grant, you will find an appointment. And we see that's why a lot of our starting grantees change the host institutions even before they start the grant, because they get a really competitive offer to give them a more stable contract or a better contract or a higher contract. So you don't need to have your position when you apply. As Odetta says, you need to have the support of a host institution, but you can be sure if you get an ERC grant, you will have a position. So the question thanking us, but also asking in the achievements part 1, can I talk about the projects I already led? Should I write about students I supervised in this part as well? So I think Odetta, you raised this point, so I'll come to you first.
You can absolutely do so. None of these specific elements is per se an evaluation criteria. What does it mean? The panel cannot say you did not supervise students, so you're not eligible to apply. But of course, if you have to prove your scientific maturity and achievements as such, it's up to you to define what they are. So if you led a project that was challenging and you can explain how this speaks in your favor, you can absolutely do so in the research achievement. You can say which students you have supervised and how you helped advance their career and so on. So you can absolutely do that, and it would help, let's say, shape your profile for the evaluators.
Thanks very much, Odetta. I'm going to use the chair's prerogative here because normally we should be having a 10-minute break. I'm going to suggest we have a 5-minute break instead, because I see there's still 76 questions. We'll answer as many as we can live, and there'll be a second questions and answer session later. But the question, I think it's more for Catherine here, in terms of what are the going rates in terms of remuneration for PhD students, postdocs and PIs? How should these be motivated in the application?
Okay, so actually I will be telling you this in the presentation, but okay, we can anticipate. There is no ERC rates, okay? So what you have to do is, of course, discuss with the host institution and check what is the salary grid in your host institution. And based on that, you will encode the personal cost in the budget table. Okay. As for the motivation, in principle, as Odetta explained, you know with who you need to work with to implement successfully the project. If you need 1 postdoc, 3 PhD students, this you will explain also in the resource section in the proposal, but I will show you. Okay, and it should make sense with, of course, the need of the project. This is how you will justify it in the proposal. But we will come back to that in my presentation.
Indeed, Catherine, you'll go through this in more detail later. Excuse me. And then question which I come to Maxine, considering the different elements of B1, are different weights assigned to them during the assessment. So maybe you can explain the assessment process.
So in the different elements of part B1, if I understand it correctly, we have two main elements. One is the principal investigator and one is a proposal. As explained before, the panel puts more weight now on the proposal than on the principal investigator. Within the proposal element, in part B1, you have two main evaluation criteria. One is a novelty and one is a feasibility. And these are not mutually exclusive. So the two elements are interlinked. If your proposal is not novel but feasible in implementation, this is unlikely to go to step 2 or to succeed. But if the proposal is very novel, but it's not feasible in terms of implementation, it's also not going to make it to step 2. So these two criteria are interconnected and are equally important for the success.
Odette, anything to add from your side?
No, just as a reminder that in B1 you also have the PI, and that has obviously less weight than the rest since 2024. So just to add to it.
Thank you. And then a question which I think we're not covering today, but I see where you're going. Is there an ERC grant that would support collaborative projects? If a project is so interdisciplinary, it can be done mostly in a single lab. Maybe Odette, I come to you for that question.
The answer is yes. That would be the synergy grant. We will not cover it today, but is in a nutshell from a minimum of 2 to a maximum of 4 PIs, maximum one of which can be outside Europe or associated countries, so and doesn't need to move, can be outside, and maximum grant is up to 14 million euros. So it's exactly this, that is so broad and so not necessarily interdisciplinary, just it can be in the same discipline, but so broad that requires more effort. But I guess it's not for today to cover.
No, and I think there was a question I saw later whether we can do a webinar on synergy, and absolutely we can, and it's something which we can plan later in the year. So I'll just take one more question before we go for the break, which I think is an important question in terms of what happens if you're, for example, in this case, going on maternity leave. So I want to start preparing my ERC starting grant proposal already now. Will the templates be different? If so, how can you advise me to proceed? I think for this one, you always have to check exactly the call which is coming forward and make sure that there are no differences in the requirements, no differences in the templates. There can be minor changes or there can be some differences in the templates. But the core argument of your proposal, why this is a great idea in terms of pushing back the frontiers of knowledge, will stay the same. And I think if you can spend more of the time on making the convincing argument on the research, it'll actually not take as much time tailoring it to the templates. But maybe Maxime or Odette, you want to say some more? No?
No.
Maybe only
Okay.
the CV. I don't think, Martin, for the CV, we are expecting any change. It changed recently, but indeed, you need to keep an eye. But at least as far as the CV is concerned, we don't expect it, but what is relevant is when the work program comes out. That's a legally binding document.
Indeed, and it's only when the work program comes out and the call opens that you'll see the full template. So I know the timing isn't great for you, but I think already start preparing, how you would write your research case in terms of what's going to be the main aim of your research. So I've not been a great chair. I've given you a 4-minute break, but I suggest we start just after 11 again. We'll have a short break so you can stretch your legs, get some water. We'll start again. The recording will stop now. We'll start it again later, and I will see you all. Don't exit WebEx. Just turn your cameras off, and we will be back in 5 minutes' time. Thank you.